Hi, folks. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of the iWrite Radio podcast stroke videocast. We've got a statement from Boris Johnson in Westminster to talk about today, and we've got the First Minister's presser to talk about. And we're going to have a wee chat about one of Stuart's hobby horses, which is the Russia report that, 8 months it's been held up?
Oh, goodness me. And you could go all the way back to before they even elected Trump.
Well, we're going to have a chat about that. But let's kick off with Boris's announcement. He, as ever, is the bearer of good tidings. I don't think he's capable of giving bad news, Boris. But effectively, lockdown ceases to be 2 meters on the 4th of July. Bars, restaurants, pubs are open. Table service only, and details of the customers will need to be taken. Kept saying things like trust the British public to use common sense. Lots of households can meet in groups outside. There doesn't seem to be a limit on the number of households. I think 6 might have been mentioned, but that's, that's a fair lump of people. He's moved the goalposts in as much as the government is now no longer taking responsibility for anything, which I think we saw coming.
Yeah, that was always clearly the plan. It was no longer, it was going to pass the blame on to the people.
Yeah.
If things go wrong.
Places that won't be open is possibly hairdressers, nail bars are opening, hotels, bed and breakfast, campsites, most leisure facilities opening. Places that aren't opening, basically hot and sweaty places. Nightclubs, soft play areas, indoor gyms, swimming pools, spas. So if it's a hot, humid, indoor facility, it's not getting to open.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the evidence would support that, because I heard a German professor talking about the outbreaks in the abattoirs and the meat processing plants in Germany, and he was saying it was cold and humid.
Well, we talked about this yesterday, but Boris has obviously gone for the hot and humid, probably an environment he's more used to.
I'm saying nothing.
So the emphasis is no longer will it be legislated for, it's now a recommendation.
What's recommended?
None of these things are now going to be legislated.
Right, so you don't have to wear a mask, you don't have to stay distancing.
No, it's all up to your common sense.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which is quite a big move, and I think indicative of the Westminster government now saying, okay, anything that happens from now on is not our fault. It's your fault. Because you didn't use your common sense. You weren't alert enough.
Well, sorry, Jimmy.
No, I was just going to say, because the public have such wonderful common sense when things have been eased ever so slightly the last couple of times.
I mean, I've got a favourite beer garden in a pub in England. I shall presumably go and visit as soon as I can. It's an enormous beer garden. There's about 2/3 of it covered in these typical beer garden tables, and it's still got room for a 5-a-side football. But the toilets are tiny, so I've no idea how you work. It'd be great to be in that beer garden.
Well, this is all happening on the 4th of July.
I wonder why.
Independence Day.
Yes, exactly. We'll get Brexit and we'll get more Union Jacks again.
It's interesting that Nichola Sturgeon's group are reporting on the 2 meter spacing on the 2nd of July. I think they're due to report.
Aye, that was basically Nichola Sturgeon today was giving herself a little bit of wiggle room, a bit of deft footwork, so that she can make some pronouncements tomorrow and more next week.
I think her policy is, and it's been neutered elsewhere, the same policy as New Zealand. and she's looking for serious suppression.
Aye. They didn't want to use the same terminology as New Zealand. I noticed that Devi Sridhar, who seems to be the guru of choice for the Scottish Government, is now using the word elimination, which is an interesting change. She wasn't using that last week.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jimmy, because there's a difference between eliminate and eradicate.
Exactly. But it's interesting to note, I got a bit bored of Nichola Sturgeon, so I popped to 1 o'clock news on to see how the Oppos were going to describe what's happening in England. And weirdly, one of the talking heads was talking about there being no virus in England, which is just ludicrous that 5 minutes after Boris makes that speech, anybody uses that term.
I know.
Given that it seems to have flatlined at or around 1,000 new cases a day in England, which is still over 50 times the community infection rate of Scotland.
So, I think it's worth pointing out, people want them. I wanted to find out what the difference between elimination and eradication and what do they mean. Eradication would be what you would only get eradication if they come up with a vaccine.
Yeah.
In which case you could say, that's it, eradicated. Everybody can have a vaccine once a year like flu or whatever decision they came to. Elimination is different. It's not as complete as that. So you're right, Jimmy, to bring that up. I'd like to mention, with reference to the situation in Germany and Anglesey and apparently in the USA, meat processing plants, apparently the Russian guy was saying it's not about the conditions in the meat processing plant, it's about the culture. It's about having migrant workers who come and work in these huge factories, and they all live in dormitory accommodation, or if in Scotland. Now here's the point of why I want to bring this up. These migrant workers that come to Scotland in huge numbers to pick our fruit and veg, they usually come and live in mobile home villages on the farms. And again, they live and socialize together. And apparently they're suggesting that is the reason for the hotspots, not the actual working conditions, but the social conditions.
That's not the case in America, is it?
I have no idea. They may have migrant workers who come from like what they call migrants in China. If you come from the countryside to the city, you're a migrant.
Well, I watched a documentary, not about COVID. This was made maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, about the loss of a meat packing plant in one of the American central states. I can't remember the name of the town. But the first thing was the number of people that worked there. There was like 5,000 people working in this meat packing plant.
Right. So you think there is a connection between cold, humid, and people working close together?
Well, this had nothing to do with COVID, as I say. It was just, I was amazed at how big these places are. Because the one in Germany, there's 4,000 people that are not working there.
Aye. Well, mate, come on. The Germans are good at running railway lines right into the centre of where they want things to be done. Loading up cattle trucks. I've got a history of it. Sorry about that.
Oh, nasty.
But, no, it's an industrialisation thing, mate. It's exactly the same in America. They bring in thousands upon thousands of cattle to central hubs, slaughter them, butcher them, pack them up, and send them out all over the country. And it's done 24/7 as well.
I think that's been an issue in farming, especially in Scotland, that there are very few abattoirs left in Scotland. They've been centralised, and it leaves farmers in remote places with a dilemma. When it
I might be wrong about this, but I think there might be no abattoirs in Scotland.
Well, I've no idea these days.
I don't know where I got that from. That's me dragging something out of my head that might be totally inaccurate. But I did hear, because I spent summer holidays once working in a slaughterhouse.
Well, I've been in a slaughterhouse because my father used to be a meat inspector amongst one of his jobs, so he had to certify that the carcasses were fit for human consumption.
But it would have to be pretty strange if there was no slaughterhouses at all. Is Gorgie still open?
No, Gorgie's shut, mate. Gorgie shut a few years back now.
Maybe I'm right. Anything else come up between the pressers? I suppose it's worth mentioning that this will give all the unionist press the excuse to headline Sturgeon under pressure to do away with the 2 metre distancing.
Yes, I suppose, I mean, she's looking for, you could almost say, excuses to, you know, she's under incredible pressure. I mean, no getting away from it. There is a real issue economically, but the business community right across the UK has been pressing like mad. To some extent, the expectation for beer gardens being opened last weekend was built up by the beer and the industry, the pub industry. They were trying to put pressure on the government to make people expect it.
The government laid it out clearly in their other stuff that in phase 2 outdoor spaces would be used, and then chose not to do that. They'll probably choose to do it from next Monday or something, but I don't think she is under much pressure, if I'm honest. Looking at what Boris has decided.
I'm sorry, I was talking about England there. Sorry, I didn't realise you were talking about Scotland. Sorry, Jimmy.
Just, as I say, what Boris has decided to do today gives her carte blanche to do whatever she wants, because community infection rates in Scotland are miles better than they are in England. So if she turns around and says, Ken, what, we can go down to 1 metre now, all she's got to do is point to the figures and say, look, we are less than 20 new cases a day. For a landmass that's approximately the same size as England, we have a population about a tenth the size of England, and they're having 50 times the new cases. I think Boris has just handed her free range to do whatever she wants. And I think that it was a deft wee bit of footwork from her today, as I say, to say that there'll be more announcements tomorrow. And on the 2nd of July, she'll take advice from her advisory team.
I think you're right, Jimmy. I actually think they've got different end points. The presumption in the press is that the end point is the same, and that is ending lockdown. But it isn't.
Yeah. No,
the point is the same in as much as they're going to end lockdown, but the conditions that allow them to end lockdown, I think, are different.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree
totally, Norrie. I think
number well below 0.5.
Well, I think as well, they mentioned the R number today, and she was very careful to point out to the journalist that asked about it that the R number becomes less important the fewer cases that you have, because small spikes, small local outbreaks can make the R number look huge again. But I think you're right. Scotland is aiming for a version of normality far, far different to what England's aiming at. In England, it's all about this: get the economy open, get the jobs working, get people back to work, get the schools open again. She's looking to do it she's looking at that endpoint, but for it to be far safer. I think you'll find, it'd be interesting to see what Swinney's got to say about schools. There's going to be a move on that this afternoon.
I think they're going to basically go for 1 metre in schools.
Yeah, well, I think so as well, mate. But I think they're also going to be saying that there's no danger that the likes of Perth and Edinburgh City Councils, who have said they will only have children back in 1 day a week, I think John Swinney's going to tell them from the Parliament building today, from Nichola Sturgeon's lovely wee lectern, that is unacceptable, and that if they try to push for 1 day a week, he will step in and instruct them to do something different.
You could be right. It's interesting that she was asked a question about the Louisa Jordan temporary hospital at the SECC, and the ignorance of the questioner was blatant. I won't bore you explaining what that was, but she took the opportunity to explain that they will be keeping it going. They are preparing for an upswing. They're not going to she's not calling it a peak, a second peak or a second wave, but they're preparing for an upswing in the winter. So they're keeping the hospital on.
I think that will get her nothing but good. Well, will it get a good press? No, it won't. Nothing she does will get a good press. But I think she'll get a lot of support from that, because it's a belt and braces approach. It's, we've done the work, we've created it. It's going to be cheaper to keep it running than to dismantle it and put it up again. Although the Tories, I've no doubt, will be complaining about the cost of it.
I was just thinking there, looking back, I think the First Minister had a good presser. I mean, she scalped Tony Martin of the Express, who's always the worst. but not badly. She was asked about pubs and possibly, easing of lockdown. She said, yes, just probably recording names. She was asked about bus drivers who in Edinburgh had refused to take responsibility for people coming on the bus not wearing masks. And she said, we don't expect them to take responsibility for that. And I mean, the question was, will the police get involved? And she made it good. It doesn't work like that, Yes.
But I mean, the press are desperate. I mean, if you look at what happens at 5 o'clock at Downing Street, and you look at what happens at 12:30 at Holyrood, it's like chalk and cheese. The game at Westminster is don't answer the question, spin it, avoid giving anything at all that looks like information. Whereas she does the exact opposite, and she floods them with information in her opening statement to the extent that most of the questions have been answered before they're asked.
It was another, they thought, who was it? Simon Johnson of the Telegraph thought he'd got a good question asking, because apparently somebody on Sky who was a care worker, presumably that there was only one care home, there had a terrible amount of deaths there, who was tested originally, has now got tested positive again. So the hyena press were thinking, oh, here's a story. However, of course, it only took the calm voice. I must admit, the chief medical officer, I don't think he's ever put a foot wrong. A temporary man, he's been there permanently for a while. And he simply said, well, come on. We've always said these tests aren't accurate. Do you want to hear the rest? No, not really.
Well, the other one that's been pretty good was Bernie Higgins the other day.
Aye, because he's too knowledgeable for any of them to try and pick apart what he came out to say yesterday. And as they go over the bones of it, the only people I've heard whining about what he's had to say so far have been the likes of Jonathan Shafi and that, but they moan about absolutely any economic plan or policy that they haven't written themselves.
That doesn't involve total nationalisation.
Aye, if when it comes for the left, you can almost dismiss it because they are critical of everything that they haven't written themselves. And I'm from the left, but as I say, when it comes to economics, the Mickey Mouse stuff is beyond laughable at times.
Stuart, you were going to say?
There was one thing that the First Minister brought up that I'm kind of looking into at the moment, and because I had a quote from a health professional. Let me just check it out. It should come up quick. Yeah, we're talking about. She was asked a question about whether the NHS. She said actually early on, she said that the NHS was never overwhelmed. She wasn't actually even asked a question about it. This is her opening little speech. And it struck me, I had come across a quote by a health professional. Basically, I've headlined it, our NHS collapsed by a plan meant to save it. Who knew? Well, I'll give you the quote. The NHS did not collapse due to COVID-19. Oops. Hold on. These things get missing. Oh, there we are. It's all right. I've got it again. It was, in effect, deliberately collapsed by cancelling all routine and preventative work.
Right. So we're talking about two different things here.
So it's not overwhelmed. The question is that obviously it's like the difference between eradication, elimination, and overwhelmed and collapsed.
No, we're not. We're talking about two different things. It wasn't overwhelmed by COVID, and it cancelled lots of operations.
Mm-hmm.
Two different things.
Well, they had to. And
one without the other.
Aye, and let's be clear. The NHS was overwhelmed in certain parts of England because hospitals down there stopped taking COVID cases. Hospitals down there shut for 3 or 4 days. It was overwhelmed, but not in Scotland.
I think
it was only in tiny pockets. But what they were looking at in late February, early March, was generally a position where the entire country, the NHS, could have been overwhelmed.
Yeah, okay. Leave it at that.
Well, Stuart, you've got a bit of a, well, what should we say? bugbear
An
about
interest in Russia.
the Russian report not being published. I think what we'll do is we'll play a wee clip here. I've forgotten his name. Oh,
Dominic Grieve,
Dominic Gray was chair of the committee
investigating the Russian. Oh, good man, good man.
Produced the report. So here we go. LBC, he's on.
Our inquiry into Russia was a wide-ranging inquiry. It wasn't just about elections or subversion of the democratic process, but was about the threat that Russia poses to the United Kingdom and its closest partners, and whether we had appropriate measures in place to counter it. Now, I very much regret that this report wasn't published before the election, because there was, in my view, absolutely no valid reason for that not happening. Indeed, we'd worked very hard, and everybody knew we wanted to get it out before the election. I wasn't sure whether the election would be now or in January, but I thought there was likely to be an election, and we worked to get it out, and we got the classification cleared, so that we had worked with the intelligence agencies and the National Security Secretariat to ensure that it could be published, and they were completely satisfied. So the sign-off from the Prime Minister, I would normally have expected to be an issue of routine, which would, generally speaking, take place in 10 days. And if there was a problem, I would expect to have heard directly from the Prime Minister as to what the problem was. He's never indicated what it was. A whole series of explanations have been offered since, most of which, I'm afraid, don't stack up. And there were some of
There you go then.
Yes, obviously, those of us who are political geeks are interested and want to know where this Russia report is. Basically, the Russian report, it's not unconnected to the Russian report into Donald Trump's election. The suggestion is that Putin's government successfully seriously influenced the referendum on Brexit. And there's very clear evidence that, after all, Boris Johnson plays tennis with rich Russian oligarchs. There seems to be a whole part of the elite in London that seems to be very close to rich Russians. On the other hand, there seems to be another elite much closer to the intelligence services that have a different opinion, who are not very happy about what the Russians are doing in London. I'll give you an illustration. Luke Harding, who wrote the book called Collusion about Putin's connections to the Trump election. He's got a book just coming out, I've already ordered it, Safety State. Anyway, he's talking about the Skripal poisoning. He's talking about, basically, he lists all kinds of names that I've still got to research to find out what's going on. There are two, I've been arguing this for weeks, that there is more than one elite. You could say Dominic Cummings and his gang are one elite, and you've got the intelligence services are one elite, and perhaps there's an even more traditional conservative elite. And almost certainly, I saw a quote, Tony Blair, had somebody published something with Tony Blair from 2005. And there's that, but there's the Blairite group as well. So there's a huge elite tussle going on in London. Who wins? I don't know. It looks like Cummings is winning at the moment, isn't he?
Jimmy?
Aye, I'd be interested to get a butcher's at the Russian report, but frankly, I don't think there's anything particularly damaging in it. I just think Boris has no interest in making people's lives easy. I think there may be some stuff there about the connections between the Elliots and Cummings that make Boris a bit uncomfortable. The Skripal thing, I think we saw with the BBC documentary last week about it, that the British government's version of that made for a good drama, but I don't think it's anywhere close to the truth. I don't think we'll ever get close to the truth unless we get an investigation for a US or a European, for example, company that goes in there and finds out a bit more about the truth. This country will just be delist about stuff like that. no danger these people were poisoned by the Russian government, I don't think. But to be honest, I didn't mind if Putin's having a bit of influence in Western politics. He's no warmongering. He's not looking to go to war with us like the Russians were when we were kids. In the American election, you just need to turn on your telly these days and look at what they elected and look at the people prancing about at his daft bloody rally in Tulsa at the weekend there. America should not be the major influence on the world in the 21st century that was in the 20th, because their education system means that half of their bloody citizens are basket cases. And that's how they've ended up with somebody like Donald Trump as their president.
I think on the Russia report, I mean, it is important what it contains. If it contains proof that there was foreign money illegally given to the Leave campaign, if the IT stuff was paid for by Russia, I think is another one of the claims. I think it's important that comes out. But what I find more interesting is the suggestion that's been bandied about in the press at the moment that two prime ministers have effectively denied the public's right and Parliament's right to look at it. I mean, they've withheld setting up a committee for 8 months so they can get a chair that is essentially a yes man. It's a bit like what Trump's been doing with judges in the Supreme Court.
It's just another example that we're going down that route, mate, that the authoritarianism of Westminster almost doesn't recognise overreach anymore.
But
this
Westminster
is an elected position. To do that.
I had
an elected position, chair of this committee.
Yeah, I had an accusation this morning, which may or not be true because I'm not up to speed on this. But remember the Henry VIII powers, as they're called, which are basically the crown in Parliament, the power that the Prime Minister has, because we don't have a written constitution. They're virtually, it's like, it's what, well, we see with Trump, he makes an executive order which ignores Congress. Now, it was suggested to me this morning that come the end of the year, by December, these Henry VIII powers will be in action. I don't know why they're not in action now, but
they are in action now.
Well, there you go.
There's a few things being put through without scrutiny, and that's effectively what it does. It means legislation can go through without scrutiny. It means, for instance, that the powers that the Holyrood holds are null and void now. That all rests at Westminster again. Do you remember the power grab? Well, Westminster now controls our ag and fish. Through
I mean, we can expect a lot of money.
Aye, but remember that it kind of suits the Scottish Parliament for Henry VIII powers to be used in Scotland, because Henry VIII was never monarch here. Those powers reside in Westminster, but they resided before the Acts of Union. So if they're using those powers in Scotland, that gives us a prima facie case to walk out of the Union at any point in time and say, by the way, you've not got a constitution, but those powers absolutely broke the Act of Union. So your use of them.
Broken the Act of Union so many times.
There is a question. I mean, there seems to be can we agree on what's likely to happen? Are they liable to shut down the Scottish Parliament? I don't think so. I think they'll just immobilise it by gradually pumping money into schemes in Scotland through the Scotland office and their new building in New Street.
No, I think the thing that's really important is what we've just been talking about. I think they'll drag powers back to Westminster under the auspices of Brexit. Oh, this all needs to lie because we've got to make these trade deals.
But would they risk it?
Can't have you interfering in Scotland just because you don't like chlorinated chicken.
Yeah, but wait a minute, Norrie, that's going to risk. Don't forget, a couple of years ago, overnight, a threat to the Scottish Parliament brought out a demonstration the next day with thousands of middle-aged people, middle-class people, holding hands round that parliament.
And
If
it
you want,
made
if you want,
absolutely no difference.
yeah, but if you want to
whatsoever.
create an uprising in Scotland, is to take away the powers of this parliament.
Really, Stuart, do you remember what that demonstration was concerning?
What was it about? Some powers.
And what happened? They took the powers anyway.
Yeah, well, obviously, yes. But do you think that won't happen again? That there won't be another if they took the powers away?
Okay, let's all run down to Holyrood and hold hands around the Parliament.
Well,
They don't give a flying about Scotland. They don't need Scotland.
But why won't they just funnel the money away from the Scottish government, drip by drip, through the Scotland office? It's a simpler solution.
Stuart, they don't have to do that if they've got the powers.
Well, okay,
they don't have to give any money to Scotland.
Well, that makes me optimistic, because if they keep doing things like you're suggesting they will, then there's far more likely to be some kind of an uprising.
Ain't gonna happen, buddy.
Once you two have finished cackling like a couple of crows about it.
Okay, Jimmy.
Aye, this is where the argument will come after next year's election, as to what it's kind of Peter Bell's part of Peter Bell's outlook on things that I most agree with, that at some point they're going to have to challenge the Scotland Act and assert the primacy of Holyrood in Scotland. Whether it be through this court case that's going on now to diminish the need, or to work out whether there is any need whatsoever for a Section 30 order. But at some point, because the people of Scotland look more and more to Holyrood as their parliament, they know that we're still a part of the United Kingdom, but particularly given the operation through COVID, Holyrood's been where people are looking for their news. Holyrood's looking where people are looking for leadership, because they don't think they're getting any leadership from London. Perhaps that's why the numbers have got to 54%, and I think they will just keep growing at the moment.
I think that's a good point, Jimmy. I think COVID is going to be seen, when we look back, as the pivotal point. The point at which the Scottish government looked so much more competent than Westminster. Even English people were wishing that Nichola Sturgeon was in charge of the UK.
Yeah, there's been some interesting numbers on that this week, that people in England have thought that even Northern Ireland, but particularly Wales and especially Scotland, have dealt with this a hell of a lot better, and that the Senate and our Parliament have been far more impressive and far more you could almost call it user-friendly.
Yeah.
They're open to the public. And like you say, Nichola, when she gets a question, we'll answer it. There's no dancing round it. If she's got the information, she'll give you it, and if she's no, she'll come back to you with the information.
No, you're right. I think there's also been a wee bit more meat in that 54% poll. It's become, there was one today, I think it was, the suggestion was the middle classes have moved to yes. And
yeah, there's a lot of...
That's an interesting question, because it struck me, and I've mentioned it before, over the last couple of years going on these parades, these marches, how many middle-class people turned up on those marches. I mean, there's a base of working-class people as well, but I'll tell you who's missing: the young on these marches. But they've got better things to do than go in independence marches, haven't they?
I'm not sure. I've always been struck by, when I was in Barcelona, I was on a big demo there, and the demographic went right from 5-year-olds right the way through to 9-year-olds. There were a lot of people from the Franco era turned out. And I reckon that the norm is now becoming Nichola Sturgeon's Holyrood. You know how a lot of people said during the referendum that people voted no to maintain the status quo. Well, the status quo is beginning to look like Nichola Sturgeon at home.
That's a very good point.
So, there was also...
If it becomes between Westminster and Holyrood, I think you'd be surprised at the number of people that go for Holyrood.
I think that's why there are considerable figures who, the likes of Joe Cherry, who are in Westminster at the moment, that want to be at Holyrood, because I think that's where the push is going to come, that gets us over the hill and gets us independent. It'll be via Holyrood. And I think there's not just Joe Cherry, there's quite a few in Westminster that I think we find a way to bring them back up the road. We find a way to get them in through list seats or something.
I think you're right. I think it is time to kind of, because they're no use at Westminster.
Aye, basically, mate.
They achieve very little.
They do, and it looks, when you look at some of them that have been there for a considerable amount of time, it does begin to worry you that certain chairmen of certain committees look far too comfortable with all the folderol and, I'm sorry, but 100 odd grand a year in salary and expenses. It looks like a few of them are too comfy in there. I'd rather that, if they're going to be ignored, if they're going to be sidelined, and they are going to be ignored and sidelined by Boris and his government, bring them up here, use that expertise, because we're going to need it. We're going to need a big punch. And why not have that in our armoury as well?
Well, I mean, the quality, I mean, we're lucky with the SNP having so much quality. I would say it's mostly at Holyrood, but you bring back Joanna Cherry, Whitford, Tommy Shepherd,
Angus McNeil.
Aye, Deirdre Brock. There's plenty good MPs down there that we could use to bolster our charge towards independence. Because I do think it'll come through Nichola. I do think it'll come through Holyrood. To be honest with you, I think the whole Salmond affair isn't going to be this huge bomb underneath the SNP that the unionist media are desperate for it to be. And looking at the makeup of that committee yesterday, I'm looking at that thinking, really?
Who's
Are we ever going to get to the truth when you've got such strangers for the truth as Jackie Bailey and Alex Cole-Hamilton on that committee? Probably not. Linda Fabiani.
Oh. She's a strong character, as is who's the other one? Angela Constance. It seems to be another strong person on that committee. I'm not sure they're in with the elite at the SNP. I'm not sure.
What? You don't think they'll put party first?
No idea.
They'll put party first. It's the SNP we're talking about here. The discipline is better than the Tories.
I just think it depends. A lot of it depends on Alex Salmond himself. It depends how much he wants to exact revenge. Will he be satisfied with a couple of civil servants, or does he want to bring heads in the party as well? And I'm not sure that he does.
I can't see him throwing years of work to the wolves.
Mm-hmm. I think he'll toss the bathwater. I think he'll toss the bathwater out, Norrie, but the bairn will be fine.
Aye, well, maybe that's the way to put it. I think maybe on that note, we'll call it a day, folks, because we're sort of up over 45 minutes.
Oh, mighty.
Well, thank you, Stuart Lockhead, Jimmy Hutton.
Bye-bye. Stuart,
thanks for listening, folks, and we'll catch up with you again tomorrow, when no doubt the world will change. Cheers for that.
It'll revolve.
At least one.